Imagine spending 2 entire years of your life enduring just one of the most rigorous, completely exhausting, and highly competitive admissions processes in the entire world.
Oh, absolutely brutal.
Right. You are not just applying to a college. You're volunteering for a crucible. You're busting your absolute hardest to secure top-tier test scores, taking the SAT or the ACT over and over until the numbers are flawless.
Which is stressful enough on its own.
Exactly. But simultaneously, you're training relentlessly to pass these intense physical fitness assessments, the candidate fitness assessment. We're talking running, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, shuttle runs, the works.
You have to prove you're an absolute physical specimen before they even look at your grades.
Yeah. And if that isn't enough, you can't just send in an application fee. You have to go out, network, interview, and secure a formal official nomination from a member of Congress, a state senator, or even the vice president.
It's a massive hurdle.
It is. You do all of this, sacrificing normal teenage experiences just to get into the United States Military Academy at West Point. So after all that blood, sweat, and paperwork, you finally get the acceptance letter. You arrive on campus, you get your head shaved, you put on the uniform, and then
you quit.
you just quit.
It sounds almost unbelievable when you frame it like that. I mean, you would assume anyone who survives that gauntlet is locked in for the long haul. But that is exactly what happens. 1 in 5 of these elite, highly vetted cadets drops out before graduation.
1 in 5. That's huge.
It's a massive number. And a huge portion of them leave during the very first 7 weeks of training. Because this isn't just, standard college orientation. It is a brutal, calculated initiation period, officially called Beast Barracks.
Just the name Beast Barracks alone gives you chills, and the reality of it is even more intense. We are talking about wake-ups at 5 in the morning.
No, thank you.
Right. By 5:30, you're in formation, standing at rigid attention, getting screamed at by upperclassmen for a uniform infraction you didn't even know existed. Then comes this relentless, nonstop physical and mental meat grinder.
It's designed to break you down.
Completely. Grueling calisthenics, marching in heavy gear, sitting through intense classroom instruction where you cannot show a single sign of fatigue.
Right.
Weapons training, athletics, all running continuously until lights out at 10 o'clock at night.
And then you wake up and do it all again.
Exactly. No weekends, no breaks to go grab a coffee, absolutely no contact with your family.
What's fascinating here is how long the United States Army actually spent trying to solve this exact mystery. Like, who will stay and who will quit? Because from a logistical and financial standpoint, every single cadet who drops out represents a massive, massive loss of resources.
Oh, for sure. Millions of dollars.
Right. So for decades, going all the way back to 1955, military psychologists tried to predict attrition. They analyzed every possible variable and eventually developed something called the whole candidate score.
The whole candidate score.
Yeah, it was designed to be the ultimate predictive algorithm. A weighted average of SAT scores, high school class rank, expert appraisals of leadership potential from teachers, and objective measures of physical fitness. Essentially, a mathematical measurement of pure talent and capability.
And the Army assumed, logically, I guess, that the cadets with the highest scores, the smartest, fastest, most naturally gifted leaders would be the ones to survive Beast Barracks.
But that mathematical algorithm completely failed. The whole candidate score, the ultimate measurement of how equipped a cadet was for West Point, literally could not predict who would drop out.
That is wild to me.
Right. The men and women with the highest talent scores were just as likely to pack their bags and go home as those with the lowest baseline scores. Talent, as it turns out, was not the deciding factor at all.
So what was?
What actually predicted who stayed was a completely different, highly measurable trait that had absolutely nothing to do with how fast they could run or how well they scored on a standardized test.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand this concept and why it challenges everything we think we know about success, we have to officially welcome you to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to explore the groundbreaking research of psychologist Angela Duckworth, specifically looking at the insights from her book, Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance.
It's such an important book for where we are culturally right now. For eons, society's been trapped inside this pervasive, almost invisible framework. We call it the myth of innate talent.
The myth of innate talent.
We are so culturally obsessed with the idea that the greatest achievers in the world, whether in the military, business, or the arts, are just born different. We think they possess some genetic magic that the rest of us lack.
Like they're mutants.
Exactly. But Duckworth's research, which spans from these elite West Point cadets to national spelling bee champions to highly successful corporate CEOs, proves something radically different. What we eventually accomplish in our lives depends far more on passion and perseverance than on our genetic lottery.
And I think to really grasp this, we have to look at Angela Duckworth's own personal backstory, because it is incredibly ironic and just sets the stage perfectly for her entire career.
It really does.
When she was growing up, her father used to frequently tell her, often completely out of the blue over family dinners, you know, you're no genius.
Which is just a brutal thing to say to a kid.
Yeah, thanks, Dad. He was deeply concerned with intelligence, constantly measuring how smart he was, how smart his kids were, and he used Albert Einstein as his ultimate unreachable yardstick. By his measure, his daughter was entirely average. She wasn't solving complex equations at age 5, so she was, in his eyes, just an ordinary kid.
The psychological weight of a parent constantly reminding you of your intellectual mediocrity would crush a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, years later, that little girl who was repeatedly told she was no genius received a very specific, life-changing phone call. The MacArthur Foundation notified her that she'd been awarded a MacArthur Fellowship.
The Genius Grant.
Yes. For those who might not know the mechanics of this, you do not apply for it. You cannot campaign for it. A secret committee of top people in your field watches your work from afar, and they decide if you're doing something profoundly important for humanity.
That is so cool.
If they select you, they just give you a massive sum of money with absolutely zero strings attached just to free you up to keep working. She won a Genius Grant for discovering that her father actually had the right answer, but he was asking the completely wrong question.
Right. She realized she actually wasn't a genius, at least not in the innate, effortless, Einstein-level way her father meant. But she was incredibly gritty, and that grit is what drove her success, far surpassing people who were born with a much higher natural baseline of intelligence.
But we are so easily distracted by talent. It is everywhere.
Why do you think we are so culturally obsessed with this idea of the natural? Even when we have evidence that hard work matters more, we still obsess over the prodigy.
It is a profound distraction, and it operates largely on a subconscious level. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can look at surveys of the American public. If you explicitly ask people, what is more important to success, talent, or effort, Americans are about twice as likely to single out effort.
We love to say we value hard work.
Right. If you ask corporate recruiters what they value in a new employee, they will endorse being hardworking nearly 5 times as often as they endorse intelligence. We build monuments to hard work. But psychological testing reveals a massive, hidden bias that contradicts everything we say out loud.
You were talking about the research by psychologist Jia Se, right? Because this study completely blew my mind when I read how she structured it.
Yes, Tay's methodology is what makes the findings so undeniable. She didn't just ask people what they preferred, she designed experiments to catch their subconscious biases in action.
Which is always the best way to do psychology.
Exactly. So she did these fascinating studies with professional musical experts. She gave these experts profiles of 2 different musicians. One was described as a natural, someone who just had an innate, effortless gift for music from a young age.
The prodigy.
Right. The other was described as a striver, someone who had to work incredibly hard, practice relentlessly, and overcome early struggles to reach their current level of skill.
And the trick of the study is that the participants were then asked to listen to an audio recording of these 2 musicians playing and evaluate who was better. But the audio clips were actually of the exact same musician playing the exact same piece of music.
Yes. The only difference was the fake biography attached to the audio file. Exactly the same audio.
That is brilliant.
But the results were staggering. The musical experts, people whose entire careers are built on objectively evaluating musical proficiency, consistently judged the natural as being superior.
Even though it was the exact same recording.
They thought the natural sounded better, had more potential, and was more likely to succeed. And Tay repeated this experiment in the business world, too. She took profiles of entrepreneurs pitching a business idea. Again, one framed as a natural business genius, the other as a hardworking striver.
Let me guess. The investors favored the natural.
Strongly favored. They were willing to invest more money and predicted higher returns for the natural, even when the striver's profile explicitly stated they had more experience and higher previous success metrics.
That is insane.
We possess a deep-seated irrational bias. We favor the natural. When we see 2 people performing at the exact same level, we subconsciously judge the one who got there through natural talent as fundamentally superior to the one who got there through effortful training. We romanticize the idea of the effortless prodigy.
I want to push back on that for a second, though. Is it just that we romanticize them, or is it that witnessing seemingly effortless perfection is just aesthetically pleasing? Like watching Simone Biles do gymnastics looks like magic. It's beautiful to watch someone who just seems built for a task.
The aesthetic pleasure is real, absolutely. But Duckworth argues that our preference for naturals goes deeper into our own psychological self-defense mechanisms. We love naturals because, frankly, it lets the rest of us off the hook.
It's an excuse.
It's the ultimate excuse.
If someone is just a born genius, then I don't have to feel bad about not achieving what they achieved. It was completely out of my control. Like, if Usain Bolt is just a genetic mutant, then my decision to sit on the couch instead of going for a run is totally justified. Why bother trying to compete with a god?
Precisely. If we acknowledge that exceptional performance is primarily the result of thousands of hours of grueling, frustrating, invisible effort, then suddenly we have to ask ourselves, why aren't I putting in that effort?
It shifts the burden of greatness from genetics to personal agency.
Which brings us right back to that West Point enigma. The reason those highly talented cadets quit during Beast Barracks is because they suddenly lost their physical strength or forgot their math skills. It is because, for the first time in their entire lives, they are facing challenges that wildly exceed their current natural skills.
Right. When you are a high achiever who has coasted on natural talent your whole life, what happens when you hit a wall? What happens when the drill sergeant demands something you simply cannot do yet?
They shatter.
Because their identity is built on being the smart one or the fast one, not the resilient one. It's not a lack of talent, it's a lack of a never-give-up attitude when the talent inevitably runs out.
That is where grit steps in to fill the void. And Duckworth didn't just leave this as an abstract philosophical idea. She actually formulated a mathematical way to look at this, a psychological equation for achievement that explains exactly why talent is only a fraction of the story.
Let's break down those equations because this is the absolute core of the grit formula, and it fundamentally changes how you view human potential. Duckworth proposes two simple equations. Equation number 1, talent times effort equals skill.
Let's pause there and define how she uses the word talent, because it is very specific. She defines talent simply as the rate at which your skills improve when you invest effort.
A rate of acquisition.
Exactly. It is a measure of velocity. If you and I both sit down at a piano and practice for 1 hour with the exact same level of focus, and you learn the song twice as fast as I do, your talent for piano is higher. Talent exists. Duckworth never claims we are all born exactly the same.
Right, but acquiring the skill isn't the end of the road. That is just having a tool in your toolbox. Here's the kicker, equation number 2. Skill times effort equals achievement.
Skill times effort equals achievement.
Achievement is what happens when you take those acquired skills, those tools you built, and actually use them to produce something in the real world.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, did you notice what happens to the variable of effort when you combine those two equations?
It factors in twice.
It counts twice. Effort builds the skill in the first place, and at the very same time, effort is the engine that makes that skill productive. Without effort, your talent is literally just unmet potential.
It's nothing more than what you could have done. It is the manuscript sitting in a drawer that never gets published.
Let's look at a tangible example from the book. Duckworth highlights the renowned potter, Warren Mackenzie. He has been at his craft, without interruption, for nearly his entire adult life. He is in his 90s now.
Wow.
When he first started, he had whatever baseline talent he was born with. He was trying to throw pots on the wheel, making mistakes, ruining clay. But as he applied effort to his baseline talent day after day, his skill improved. He eventually acquired the ability to make a truly good pot.
That fulfills the first equation. Talent times effort equals skill.
Exactly. But if he stopped there, he would just be a guy who knows how to make a good pot. To reach achievement, he had to apply effort to that skill. He woke up every day for decades, sat at the wheel, and produced thousands of beautiful pots that are now sitting in people's homes, enriching their lives. That is the achievement.
If he had the initial talent but never put in the daily effort, the skill would never have materialized, let alone the legacy of his life's work.
Yeah.
I think the most visceral way to understand this double multiplier of effort is the analogy she uses about the treadmill. We've all seen this dynamic play out.
Oh, the treadmill analogy is perfect.
Getting on the treadmill for a hard workout is difficult. Pushing yourself during that run takes effort, it burns. But where grit really lives is not in that single workout. Grit is the decision to get back on the treadmill the next day and the day after that.
Especially after a failure.
Especially then. After an injury or a day where you feel incredibly weak. Because if you permanently quit, if that treadmill just becomes an expensive clothes hanger in your basement, which apparently happens to about 40% of people who buy home exercise equipment, your effort in those equations plummets to absolute zero.
And mathematics dictates that when a multiplier is 0, the whole equation goes to 0. When effort plummets to 0, your skills stop improving immediately and you stop producing anything with the skills you already have. Your trajectory flatlines.
Consistency of effort over the long run is everything. Actor Will Smith has spoken about this brilliantly, and Duckworth quotes him in the book.
I love his perspective on this.
He points out that his massive success in Hollywood isn't about being the most naturally talented actor in the room. He freely admits there are people with more innate dramatic chops. But he says his success comes from his willingness to get on the treadmill and stay on it long after everyone else has gone home. He famously said that his skill is developed by hours and hours and hours of beating on your craft.
Beating on your craft.
It is such a visceral, almost violent image of persistence. But if we accept that effort counts twice and that staying on the treadmill is the key, we have to define what actually keeps a person on that treadmill.
Right, what is the fuel?
What exactly is this anatomy of grit? Because we throw the word around a lot in corporate boardrooms and sports locker rooms, but Duckworth defines it very specifically as a combination of two distinct elements: passion and perseverance.
We really need to redefine how we use the word passion in this context, because popular culture has completely warped our understanding of it.
Totally.
For a lot of people, passion is synonymous with infatuation. It's obsession. It is this intense, burning, uncontrollable emotion that consumes you entirely, like fireworks going off in your brain.
Like you watch a documentary about deep-sea diving, and suddenly you are passionate about marine biology and you want to drop everything to move to the ocean.
Exactly. But when you look at incredibly gritty people, the true paragons of grit, passion is not about emotional intensity at all. It is about consistency over time.
That is a massive paradigm shift. We so often confuse a fleeting, high-intensity obsession with genuine passion. But for the gritty person, passion is endurance. It is staying loyal to a goal.
Yes.
It's not just falling in love with a project on day 1 when everything is new and exciting. It's staying in love with it on day 500 when it's boring, when you are bogged down in the administrative details and when the initial thrill is completely gone. Passion is a compass that keeps pointing in the same direction, no matter the weather.
To understand how gritty people maintain that unwavering direction, we have to look at how they structure their lives and their daily decisions. Duckworth introduces the concept of a goal hierarchy.
A goal hierarchy.
Imagine a pyramid of goals. At the very top, the peak of the pyramid, you have your top-level goal. This is your ultimate concern. It is your life philosophy as the single organizing principle of almost all your waking activity.
Everything else you do is designed to serve this one peak.
Right. For Duckworth herself, that top-level goal is clearly defined. Use psychological science to help kids thrive.
And then beneath that singular top-level goal, you have mid-level and low-level goals forming the base of the pyramid. These are the daily tasks, the short-term projects, the stepping stones that push you upward.
Give me an example of a low-level goal for her.
A low-level goal for Duckworth might be something as mundane as leaving the house by 8 a.m. Why does she need to do that? So she can get to her lab on time. Why? So she can finish running a specific data set. Why? So she can publish a paper. Why? To fulfill that ultimate top-level goal of using science to help kids, every small action is tethered to the ultimate concern.
What's fascinating here is how this goal hierarchy perfectly explains why some people look incredibly busy and seem like they are working incredibly hard, but they aren't actually gritty or successful. Psychologist Gabrielle Oettingen calls this trap positive fantasizing.
Positive fantasizing, that sounds dangerous.
It is. You have a top-level goal. Let's say, I want to be a neurosurgeon. And you spend hours vividly imagining how wonderful that would be. You picture the scrubs, the respect, saving lives. But you haven't built the mid-level or low-level goals to support it.
You aren't studying for the MCAT. You aren't shadowing doctors.
Exactly. You have a roof floating in midair with absolutely no pillars holding it up.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this is where the biggest misconception about grit gets shattered. People tend to think grit means stubbornly refusing to ever quit anything, no matter what.
That grit is just blind, deaf persistence.
Right. But the book introduces this incredibly nuanced concept of the angry X. Imagine you have your goal hierarchy drawn out on a whiteboard, and one of your low-level goals completely fails.
Mhm.
You apply for a specific grant to fund your lab, and you get rejected, or a business strategy goes bankrupt.
You get an angry red X drawn right through that low-level goal.
Exactly. A truly gritty person doesn't just stare at the X, refuse to accept reality, and beat their head against the wall trying to force a dead idea to work. They easily, quickly, and unapologetically abandon that low-level goal. They quit it,
They quit.
and then they find a new low-level goal to replace it that serves the exact same mid-level purpose.
That flexibility is the hallmark of true grit. They are incredibly, fiercely stubborn at the top of the hierarchy, but highly adaptable and flexible at the bottom.
Improvise, adapt, overcome.
Like the military says, if a specific tactic isn't working on the battlefield, the gritty commander throws it out immediately and finds a different path to the same ultimate objective. They don't change the objective, they change the route.
Conversely, a lack of grit often manifests as skipping around from one entirely different top-level pursuit to another.
We all know someone like this.
Oh, yeah. This is the person who spends a year intensely practicing the piano to become a concert pianist, then gets bored and decides to start a tech company, and when that gets hard, they pivot to becoming a pastry chef.
They are working hard at a bunch of disconnected things.
But because the top-level goal keeps shifting, the effort never compounds. That is not grit, it's just being busy, and ultimately it's a recipe for a life of half-finished projects. So this brings us to the most crucial, practical part of our deep dive. If grit isn't just a genetic trait, and Duckworth's longitudinal studies showed definitively that grit absolutely grows and matures over time as we age, how do we intentionally cultivate it? How do we grow grit from the inside out?
Duckworth identifies 4 specific psychological assets that mature exemplars of grit all share in common. These aren't things you are born with, they are things you develop.
Asset number 1 is interest.
And again, we have to dispel a toxic cultural myth right out of the gate here. We constantly hear graduation speakers tell young people to follow your passion.
The worst advice.
It is terrible, anxiety-inducing advice if you believe that a passion is something that just hits you like a lightning bolt in a moment of sudden epiphany. Childhood and adolescence are generally far too early to know what your lifelong top-level goal will be. True interest doesn't start with a revelation.
It begins with a clumsy, low-stakes period of discovery, usually around middle school, where you're just figuring out general likes and dislikes. You try a sport, you try an instrument, you read a book about space.
I think that's such a relief to hear for you listening out there. You don't just find a passion hidden under a rock, you forge it. It requires years of active development, deepening, and friction.
You have to endure the beginner phase, where everything you do is frustrating and you aren't very good at it. You have to learn to tolerate the awkwardness of being a novice.
Which leads directly to the second asset. Once you have cultivated an interest, you have to hone it. That brings us to practice.
But Duckworth is very specific here. We are not just talking about putting in the hours. We are talking about the difference between deliberate practice versus flow.
What's fascinating here is this is perhaps the most technical and critical distinction in the entire book. Deliberate practice is a framework pioneered by the late cognitive psychologist Anders Ericsson, who spent his life studying world-class experts. Deliberate practice is not just logging hours.
Right. If you go out and jog the exact same 3-mile route at the exact same pace every day for a year, you are getting exercise, but you are not doing deliberate practice, and your running time will not significantly improve.
Deliberate practice has 4 strict, non-negotiable requirements.
What are they?
First, it requires a clearly defined stretch goal. You must be deliberately trying to do something you cannot currently do. You're targeting a specific weakness.
Okay.
Second, it requires full, uncompromised concentration and effort. You cannot be checking your phone or daydreaming. Third, it requires immediate and informative feedback, which is usually negative. A coach or a metric is telling you exactly what you did wrong.
Ouch.
And fourth, it requires repetition with reflection and refinement. You take the negative feedback, adjust your approach, and try again.
I'm just listening to those 4 steps, and it sounds absolutely miserable. It sounds exhausting.
It is entirely exhausting.
Yeah.
In fact, Ericsson found that even world-class experts, the best musicians, athletes, and chess players in the world, can usually only sustain true deliberate practice for about 1 hour at a time.
Really? Just 1 hour?
The cognitive load is too heavy.
Yeah.
And they max out at about 3 to 5 hours a day. It is a grueling process designed to expose your weaknesses, tear them down, and rebuild them.
Now, contrast that grueling process with the concept of flow, which was famously described by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Flow is that magical state where you're in the zone. Time distorts. The work feels effortless. You're completely absorbed in the task and your skills perfectly match the challenge.
Everyone wants to be in flow.
Right. A lot of people look at top performers and assume they're just constantly living in a state of flow, and that's why they are so good. But Duckworth argues that this is a dangerous illusion. Gritty people actually spend far more time doing the painful, frustrating work of deliberate practice.
And that is what earns them the right to experience more flow later on. Deliberate practice is for preparation. Flow is for performance. They are two entirely different psychological states.
Like Rowdy Gaines, the Olympic gold medalist swimmer Duckworth interviewed.
Yes, perfect example. To prepare for the 1984 Games, over an 8-year period, Gaines swam 20,000 miles.
20,000 miles?
He swam those 20,000 miles in 50-yard increments, staring at a black line on the bottom of a pool, constantly tweaking his stroke, getting yelled at by his coach for micro inefficiencies. That is deliberate, agonizing preparation.
The gold medal race itself, the moment the starting gun fired, that was the performance. That was where the flow happened. His body took over and executed perfectly. But the effortless flow of the race does not exist without the thousands of hours of agonizing, deliberate practice preceding it.
So if deliberate practice is that miserable, how do people not just burn out and quit?
That brings us to the third asset of grit, which acts as the survival mechanism for all that hard work. Purpose. And Duckworth is very careful to define what this means. This isn't just about personal ambition or wanting to be rich and famous. Purpose, in the context of grit, is the deep-seated conviction that your work matters to other people.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, it explains how people sustain passion over decades without succumbing to burnout. Duckworth points to a massive survey of 16,000 adults. The data showed that gritty people value pleasure, the hedonic aspects of life, like eating good food, relaxing, having fun just as much as anyone else.
They aren't joyless monks.
They aren't.
Ah,
But where they differ drastically is that they score off the charts on eudaimonic happiness.
eudaimonic.
Yes, a concept rooted in ancient Greek philosophy, which describes the desire to seek a meaningful, other-centered life. It is the fulfillment that comes from realizing your potential for the benefit of humanity.
When you interview mature grit paragons, whether they are street sweepers, teachers, or CEOs, they inevitably frame their work in terms of how it pays dividends to others. They talk about their students, their clients, their community, or society at large. Interest alone, without purpose, is nearly impossible to sustain for a lifetime.
It's the classic parable of the bricklayers. You walk up to 3 people laying bricks and ask them what they're doing. The first says, "I'm laying bricks. That's a job."
The second says, "I'm building a wall. That's a career."
The third says, "I'm building a cathedral." That is a calling. The physical work is exactly the same, but the purpose completely changes their capacity to endure the physical toll of the labor.
And that brings us to the fourth and final asset that gritty people develop: hope. But we have to be clear, we aren't talking about wishing on a star or blind optimism.
No, this is not the passive expectation that tomorrow will magically be better just because the universe is kind. It is the active expectation that your own efforts can and will improve your future.
Fall 7, rise 8.
Exactly, the Japanese proverb. It is a rising to the occasion kind of perseverance. And Duckworth discovered that this specific kind of hope is intimately biologically tied to how we view our own brains and abilities.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? How do you take these 4 assets, interest, practice, purpose, and hope, and actually build them? Here's where it gets really interesting, because it starts with the most actionable step in the entire book. If you want to build hope, you have to fundamentally update your beliefs about intelligence, leaning heavily on the research of psychologist Carol Dweck.
Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset is the bedrock upon which grit is built. She has proven through neurological studies that the human brain changes, adapts, and grows new connections when subjected to effort and struggle.
Neuroplasticity.
Yes, when you learn something hard, you are physically rewiring your brain. When you adopt a growth mindset, you stop attributing failure to a permanent, unchangeable lack of talent. You realize that saying, "I can't do this," is an incomplete sentence. The true sentence is, "I can't do this yet."
If you want to build hope and grit, you have to stop telling yourself that your current limitations are permanent.
The mindset shift is crucial, but it has to be paired with action.
And if you want a highly practical, structured way to implement deliberate practice and grit in your daily life, You need to adopt what Duckworth calls the hard thing rule. This isn't just theory for her. She uses this in her own family with her husband and her two daughters. It is a household constitution, and it has three very clear, non-negotiable parts.
I love this rule.
Part 1. Everyone in the family, parents included, must do a hard thing. And a hard thing is strictly defined as something that requires daily, deliberate practice. For Duckworth, it's her psychological research and writing. For her daughter, it might be playing the piano or running track.
Part 2 is where the psychological training really happens. You can quit your hard thing, but you can never quit on a bad day.
Never on a bad day.
You must finish the interval you committed to. If you start a sports season, you finish the season. If you pay tuition for a semester of classes, you finish the semester. You reach a natural, predetermined stopping point.
You cannot quit just because a coach yelled at you, or you lost a race, or you feel exhausted on a Tuesday afternoon.
You have to push through the emotional low, finish the commitment, and then, on a good day, when you are clear-headed, you can decide if you want to sign up for the next interval.
It teaches emotional regulation. You learn not to let a temporary spike in frustration dictate a long-term decision. And part 3 of the rule ensures this doesn't turn into tyranny. You get to pick your own hard thing.
Because you cannot force someone to be gritty about something they have absolutely zero interest in.
They have to choose it, which taps right back into that first asset of cultivating personal interest. It is a brilliant framework, not just for raising kids, but for managing yourself as an adult. Pick a hard thing, commit to a specific time frame, and promise yourself you will not quit on a bad day.
While implementing this rule and trying to build grit, there are some common pitfalls you should be aware of. We already touched on Uddingen's concept of positive fantasizing, the danger of imagining a great future without aggressively planning for the very real, very ugly obstacles that will get in your way.
You have to visualize the roadblocks, not just the finish line.
And secondly, do not fall into the trap of confusing brute force exhaustion with high-quality deliberate practice. Just working yourself to the bone, grinding out 10-hour days at the office doing the exact same tasks over and over is not deliberate practice. If you aren't focused on a stretch goal, actively seeking negative feedback and refining your technique, you aren't growing. You are just aging.
I want to pivot here because everything we've discussed makes grit sound like an unassailable superpower. But there is a very real debate that comes up often when discussing Duckworth's work. Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Are there limitations to grit? Could we be inadvertently creating an epidemic of grit where people become so doggedly determined, so obsessed with not being a quitter, that they hold on to dead-end goals for far too long, missing out on vastly better opportunities that are passing them by?
This raises an important question, and it is a completely valid criticism of how the concept of grit can be weaponized or misunderstood. We have all seen the destructive side of stubbornness.
The sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. Finishing whatever you begin without exception, refusing to acknowledge changing circumstances is a fantastic way to sink a business, ruin your finances, or stay in a toxic relationship. The sunk cost fallacy is real. However, Duckworth addresses this by looking at the broader reality of human behavior at scale.
What did she find?
When she surveyed hundreds of adults across various professions about their grit scores, she found something very telling. Many people in the survey expressed a deep desire to be grittier. They felt they gave up too easily. But not a single person in the entire massive sample wished they were less gritty.
Wow, not a single person.
Not one. While the theoretical danger of holding on too long exists, for the vast majority of the population, the far more present and damaging danger is giving up on their potential far too early.
It's a matter of looking at where the actual epidemic lies. We don't have an epidemic of people holding onto their dreams too long. We have an epidemic of people abandoning them at the first sign of friction. So who really benefits most from reading this book and internalizing these concepts?
I think it's the people who secretly feel like flakes.
Yes. The people who have a basement full of half-finished hobbies, who jump from one pursuit to another the moment the new car smell wears off, or who harbor a deep, quiet sense of guilt that they have squandered their natural talents.
This research is a lifeline for them. It shows them that they aren't uniquely broken. They aren't lacking some magical innate genius that everyone else was born with. They're simply missing the architecture of consistency. They just need to organize their goal hierarchy and learn to stay on the treadmill.
As we synthesize all of this, let's reflect on some of the most memorable quotes from the text, because Duckworth is incredibly adept at crystallizing these complex psychological concepts into powerful axioms. The first one that always stands out to me is, "Our potential is one thing, what we do with it is quite another."
I think about that quote constantly. It completely validates that everyone has potential, maybe even immense world-changing potential. It doesn't deny genetics, but it dramatically shifts the entire burden of responsibility onto our daily actions. Your potential is just a starting line. It's an invitation, but it won't run the race for you.
The second quote serves as a cold, necessary reality check for a culture obsessed with viral launches and grand announcements. Enthusiasm is common, endurance is rare.
So painfully true.
Hmm.
Everyone is wildly enthusiastic on day one of a new diet, or a new business launch, or a new workout plan. Buying the domain name for your new company is fun.
Starting is intoxicating. But endurance, that quiet, unglamorous willingness to wake up on day 50 when it's raining outside, when nobody is watching, when you're tired and doubting yourself, and do the work anyway. Doing the work anyway, that is rare. That is the filter that separates the dabblers from the masters.
And finally, we have to return to the core mathematical thesis of the entire book. As much as talent counts, effort counts twice. It is, at its heart, the ultimate democratizing message. You might not be the smartest person in the room. You might not be the most naturally gifted athlete on the field. But you have ultimate, uncompromising control over the effort you apply to build your skill and the effort you apply to turn that skill into achievement.
Okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, the summary of the core message here is deeply empowering. The limits we face in life, the ceilings we hit, are almost always self-imposed. We hit a wall, things get hard, and we tell ourselves, I guess I'm just not talented enough to go further.
But this research proves that success isn't about being a born genius. It is about taking the time to discover and refine a top-level goal you care deeply about. It is about subjecting yourself to the grueling, uncomfortable work of deliberate practice.
It is about connecting your daily, mundane grind to a greater purpose that serves others, so you don't burn out. And most importantly, it is about having the relentless hope, that growth mindset, to get back on the treadmill the day after a brutal, humiliating failure.
And I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought from the very end of Duckworth's book. Because as much as we have praised grit today, Duckworth herself emphasizes a critical caveat. Character is plural.
Character is plural.
Grit is incredibly powerful, but it is just one interpersonal virtue. It is what we might call a resume virtue. It helps you get things done. But it operates in a vacuum if it isn't balanced alongside interpersonal virtues like kindness, generosity, and empathy, and intellectual virtues like curiosity, humility, and open-mindedness. You don't just want a resume full of impressive achievements. You want a life well lived.
That is such a profound question to walk away with, and it's the perfect place to leave it. Are you using your grit merely to collect accolades, crush your competition, and feed your own ego? Or are you cultivating your grit to forge a purposeful, eudaimonic life that actually benefits the people around you? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the true nature of passion and perseverance. Take these lessons, analyze your goal hierarchy, define your hard thing, and whatever happens, keep putting one foot in front of the other.